Nowadays, when the power goes off, most of us scarcely look up from our devices. We light a candle, flick through our phones, and wait for the lights to return. In 1942, darkness had a completely different meaning. It wasn't simply an annoyance. The floorboards were cold under your feet. Empty pans on the stove. A family sits together, ready for the unknown. There were no backup grids in Europe's war-torn cities, let alone beyond. There are no warning alerts. There are no trucks racing in with essential supplies. The silence was occasionally disturbed by a distant siren or a homemade burner that kept someone alive. Back then, survival tools were not selected from a store shelf. They were clung to since they were all that you had. A decrepit hand pump draws water from far beneath. A soot-blackened stove burns wax scraps. To keep the cold at bay, a wool blanket was attached to a broken window. They were not glossy. They were not modern. Nevertheless, they worked. No electricity. No fuel deliveries. No authorization is required. The structures were designed for collapse, which has already occurred. Today, most of us would not recognize them. We exchanged durability for convenience. I had forgotten what it's like to stand alone. But the real tools are still out there. Buried under a shed. Rusting in barns. Waiting in basements. If the lights go out permanently, you won't be saved by the latest technology. It will be the oldest tool you were wise enough to save. If you're still here, you already understand why this is important. Hit subscribe, and you'll never have to depend on the system again. Let's begin with number 1, paraffin stoves. When the bombing strikes cut off the city's gas supply, people lost more than just their kitchen. They lost the heartbeat of daily life, the whistle of boiling tea, the aroma of toasting bread, and the comfort of warm water for washing. However, hunger does not wait for repairs. Electric cookers were worthless. Wood was nearly impossible to find in busy cities. Coal was rationed and protected like a gem. In the hush, one basic tool stood forward, the paraffin stove. Small, portable, and terribly serious. These burners burned liquid paraffin, sometimes known as kerosene, which was retrieved from hidden tins tucked under floorboards or wrapped in oilcloth beneath the bed. Most were dented and blackened from years of use, with the faint, pungent odor of petroleum. They were straightforward to operate. With just a wick and a flame, you can cook in complete darkness. Some family placed bricks around them to create makeshift ovens. Others balanced antique grill racks salvaged from bombed-out homes. A mother might boil water, make soup, or bake a basic wartime bread substitute comprised of powdered potato and flour with only a few ounces of fuel. Unlike wood-burning hearths, paraffin burners did not require anything outside. They labored indoors, in basements, shelters, and small apartments where smoke could kill you and room was limited. They let off very little soot. They were silent. And they finished the job. However, they were not without perils. If the air was stagnant, the vapors were poisonous. Children were kept well away. A reckless fuel spill might devastate everything. Despite this, these stoves became the heart of the home. Morning tea. Evening stew. Warm cloths were used to clean a newborn after the water lines were disconnected. All of it sprung from that modest, persistent flame. Families persevered by lighting one blue flame at a time. When the war ended, those paraffin stoves disappeared. Shiny appliances have taken their place. Instant ignition replaced the delicate lighting of a wick. But for those who experienced it, the smell of paraffin is more than simply nostalgia. It smells of survival. Fast forward to today, and most houses have no backup method for boiling water or cooking food without power. If the power went out tomorrow, how many people would know what to do? In a world based on the belief that systems will never fail, the families who prepare for stillness endure the longest. Would you keep one at home now? Or has convenience quietly supplanted every backup you previously had? Number 2, tin can heaters. When the coal ran out and winter set in, no one called for aid. They turned to rubbish. Empty food tins, discarded by others, became one of the war's most innovative survival devices. The design was brutally simple. Roll the cardboard into a tight spiral within the can. Pour in melted paraffin wax or leftover candle drippings until well absorbed. Light it, and you'll get heat. No wick. There's no smoke. Just a slow, steady flame that may last for hours. Some called them buddy burners. Others used tin can heaters. The name wasn't important. What mattered was warmth. Scraps from bomb-damaged structures. Cardboard from old boxes. Wax was salvaged from guttering candles. Mothers melted it over low heat, wearing soot-blackened mittens and pouring cautiously. Children learned to roll the cardboard strips tightly since every inch equaled more heat. These small heaters sparked a quiet revolution in damp bomb bunkers deep down. They dried the socks. Warm hands. Wrapped sleeping newborns in old coats to keep the frost off their faces. There's no roaring fire. No flaming embers. Just a quiet, resolute light. Offshore, they faced risks. Paraffin is flammable. Build it incorrectly, and the wax may overflow or flare up. Even though they were safer than coal smoke, they still required ventilation, because oxygen is limited in enclosed places. There were no thermostats. There are no repair calls. There are no emergency heaters in the store. You either generated your own heat or went without. By 1944, entire neighborhoods in colder climates were employing them. They were stuffed inside backpacks during evacuations, placed beside beds for instant light and warmth. Some families even used them to cook, boiling rationed eggs or heating a kettle for tea when the burner was turned off. Today, most people cannot believe that warmth can emanate from something so small and basic. We expect heat at the flick of a switch. But switches fail. Systems break. And when they do, comfort vanishes faster than you realize. One tin can. Prepare quietly and peacefully. This could mean the difference between survival and pain. It is not about being clever. It's about being prepared, as millions once were. Would you know how to create one before winter arrives? If not, here is your opportunity. Learn it. Try it. Please share it in the comments. Because these are the abilities that the world has largely forgotten. Number 3, Victory Garden Kits. When ration lines stretched longer than daylight and food shipments were stifled by blockades, people did not just wait to be rescued. They sowed their survival seeds directly into the soil. Victory gardens were not simply propaganda posters. They represented policy put into action. And they worked. Scraps of earth served as lifelines on rooftops, back alleys, schoolyards, and churchyards. However, wartime gardening was not based on guessing. Civilians were given little kits, sometimes a metal tin, sometimes a wooden box, containing seed packets, small tools, and step-by-step instructions printed on rough, yellowed paper. These were not created for aesthetics or variety. They were designed to maximize yield. Carrots, beets, turnips, cabbage, beans. Crops that are dense and high in calories can flourish on poor soil and harsh weather conditions. The kits contained trowels and pruners manufactured from reclaimed steel. Twine is made from discarded uniforms. Even the packaging served a purpose, tin lids repurposed to reflect sunlight onto low-growing leaves. In the hands of civilians, these kits became weapons against famine. They kept families alive despite sieges and bombardment. When ration coupons were no longer available and market shelves were empty, they fed the children. Gardens sprouted up in the cracks between the pavement, on train embankments behind factories, and even within bombed-out homes, where roofless rooms were converted into greenhouses using salvaged glass and sheer resolve. But make no mistake, these were not lazy gardens. They required meticulous preparation, persistent attention, and actual physical labor. With no fertilizer and few tools, families composted everything. Sources of trace minerals include eggshells, potato skins, coffee grounds, and human hair. The crops were rotated with military precision. Seeds were kept and traded in brown paper envelopes, which were handed about as currency. However, success was not certain. Pests, mold, and early frost can undo weeks of work. Water shortages during summer blackouts reduced soil to dust. However, when it succeeded, the benefits extended beyond just food. It was confidence. Every sprout represented a small act of rebellion. Every ripe tomato was proof that you didn't have to rely on others to keep your family alive. By 1943, civilian gardens produced roughly half of Britain's crops. Not from companies. Not from long-haul trucks. From human hands and the soil beneath their feet. Gardening is now considered a hobby. Back then, it was infrastructure, which was silent, dispersed, and impossible to disconnect. When trucks cease rolling again, you won't be able to rely on frozen dinners. It will be the seeds you sowed when there was still time. It will be the seed you have saved. You cleaned this tool. You kept an area of ground ready. If you don't know what grows in your own soil, you're already behind. Subscribe now and begin restoring your food security, 1 square foot at a time. Number 4, hand crank radios. The news was cut off when the power went off. And during a war, quiet was not a guarantee of safety. It was danger without direction. Information was life. You needed to know where the next air raid will occur. What street still has clean water? When to evacuate? When to conceal? When to hope? But what about radios that are plugged into the wall? Ineffective during power outages. Batteries? Rationed, hoarded, and nearly impossible to locate. People turned to something older. Something mechanical. The hand crank radio. No plugs. No batteries. Just movement. A steady turn of the handle generated enough power to activate the signal. Families huddled together in dark cellars and shuttered kitchens. The static hissed and then faded. And a voice, sometimes official, sometimes coded, would break through the hush. Not for amusement. For survival. Orders. Warnings. Instructions. Civil defense issued some models. Others were improvised, with coils salvaged from failed sets and copper wire taken from scrap, all welded together in whatever box could contain them. They weren't attractive, but they worked. 5 minutes of cranking may get you 10 minutes of reception, long enough to find out if the bombers had passed, if the roads were safe, or if ration books would be reissued that week. Additionally, these radios provided more than just information. Control. When the world felt chaotic, turning that handle and hearing a voice confirmed that you weren't completely cut off. They were not flawless. Parts broke. The towers were bombed. Frequencies are jammed. Some nights, no voice appeared at all. Nevertheless, people cranked. Just in case. Today, we scroll through headlines on brilliant screens powered by delicate grids. We assume the signal will always be present. But if it goes dark, and stays dark, will you be able to hear what happens next? The hand crank radio is not a relic. It is a lifeline. Will you remember the frequency of your own self-created signal? Or will you sit in the dark, hoping that someone is still listening? Subscribe to never lose the signal again. Number 5. Wool blankets and blackout curtains. When winter arrived and bombs fell, survival relied on warmth and concealment. Central heating? A luxury for the majority. Fuel was rationed. Coal deliveries were questionable. Fireplaces were used for cooking or caring for the ill. But the cold wouldn't wait. It entered through smashed windows, roofs, and cracked walls. And light, even the smallest candle flicker, may bring death from above. People turned to two instruments that never made headlines but frequently made a difference. Thick woolen blankets. Blackout curtains. Wool blankets weren't only used for sleeping. They were nailed over doors to prevent drafts. Hung across windows to retain heat. Spread across floors to plug the spaces where frigid air entered through bomb-damaged walls. Wool kept you warm even when damp, which was a valuable advantage when the roof leaked and the walls sweated from condensation. Children slept covered in layers, cocooned on the floor next to their relatives. At night, entire families crowded in a single room to trap every ounce of warmth, with blankets lining the walls like improvised insulation. But warmth was just half the battle. During air strikes, even the smallest flash of light could attract enemy attention. One lamp that was forgotten. There is one gap in the curtain. That was all it needed to make your home a target. This is where blackout curtains came in. Blackout curtains were made of heavy, dark fabric, tar paper, or salvaged upholstery and were not optional. They were the law. Wardens patrolled the streets after dusk, looking for even the smallest glimmer of light. If they noticed it, you were warned or fined. During wartime, a fine was the least of your concerns. People became imaginative. Some doubled up wool blankets. Others covered their windows in thick black paint or installed cardboard panels lined with soot. When night fell, homes were changed into enclosed chambers, not only to keep the heat in, but also to disappear from the sky. There was no second opportunity. A single uncovered window may cost the entire street. It became a nightly ritual. Before evening, draw the curtains, check the covers, and seal all cracks. Even lights donned homemade hoods to conceal their glow. The results were invisible. That was the point. Entire cities may fall beneath a cloak of darkness, shielding the life below. Today, blackout curtains are available to help you sleep in. Wool blankets are pulled out for guests. However, these were not always comfort things. They were frontline fortifications in a war with no front lines. In a grid-down society, warmth and invisibility are not considered luxury. They are surviving. Because when the cold hits and the lights go out, the question will not be how much technology you have. It will depend on your ability to blend in. Would your home vanish at night, or would your windows glow like targets? Number 6. Coal scuttles and ash sieves. Fuel was not only scarce in wartime cities, it was also considered sacrosanct. Coal rationing deprived households of their primary heat source. And once your allocation was depleted, that was it. There's no waiting list. No extensions. Only cold. Even in the face of scarcity, some people saw supply where others just saw waste. They went to the hearth, not for warmth, but for the remains. With coal scuttles and ash sieves, families learned how to retrieve what the fire had left behind. After each burn, they would collect cooled ashes from stoves and grates. At first sight, all you see are piles of grey powder. But concealed inside were minor treasures, shards of unburned coal, particles too small to notice at first, and parts that hadn't completely caught. Ash sieves, manufactured from metal mesh stretched over salvaged wood frames, became indispensable equipment. The ashes were carefully dumped in and gently swirled until the fine dust dropped below and the larger, reusable chunks remained on top. Some folks sifted their ashes twice. Others blended leftover coal dust with potato starch or even animal fat and hand-pressed it into little briquettes. They dried for days before being torched. It was a dirty job. Messy. Labor-intensive. But it's definitely required. The tradition was taught to children at an early age. Sweep the hearth. Sift with care. Save whatever burns. Because on a cold night, that extra handful of recovered coal could mean another hour of heat. Boiling water for tea. Keeping pipes from freezing. Taking the edge off the cold that has seeped into damaged homes. It was not without peril. Breathing ash in a confined kitchen may damage your lungs. Mesh wore down, and broken frames wounded hands. Sifting ash among unstable ruins in bomb-damaged dwellings posed its own set of risks. Nevertheless, they persisted. Because the alternatives were colder. And in war or in winter, defeat begins when you stop trying. By 1943, ash sieves were in almost every home. Not bought, but built. The neighbors traded bits of screen wire. Tin snips became tools for survival. The coal scuttles were guarded with quiet seriousness. This was not innovative. It was memory. A return to previously recognized procedures, which had been buried for decades beneath convenience. Today, when fuel prices rise, most of us simply whine. However, few have ever handled a sieve. Few people are familiar with the scent of repurposed coal or how ashes can be utilized to generate heat. The real lesson is not about fire. It's about discipline, the kind that creates something from nothing. Number 7. Manual water pumps. When the taps were dry, thirst struck quickly. Not just for drinking, also for cooking, washing, and sanitation. Clean water has always been the quiet backbone of civilization. During the conflict, it was the first object to collapse. Bombing raids destroyed underground utilities. Water towers went dry. Pipes either froze solid in the winter or split wide open due to neglect. Finally, there was stillness at the faucet. For many, the only solution came from below, the manual water pump. These hand-powered lifelines, which had been ignored for decades and rusted away in courtyards and gardens, became crucial infrastructure overnight. Mounted over historic wells or underground cisterns, they drew water to the surface with only a lever, a seal, and human strength. There are no wires. No fuel. Just steel and muscle. They had never left the villages. Once operational, each pump became a focus of activity. At morning, lines formed, with buckets, tin cans, and bottles grasped in numb fingers. Families walked kilometers, sometimes twice a day, securing every drop. However, pump water was not always safe. Flooded lines led to pollution. Stagnant cisterns bred illness. People boiled every drop they could, using paraffin stoves if they had them. Those without? They built their own sand and charcoal filters in old socks, as well as slow-drip purifiers out of cotton funnels and road gravel. Every drop mattered. All methods were counted. The pump seemed unconcerned about outages, frost, or blackouts. It just worked, if you worked for it. Pump for 15 minutes to get 10 liters. Arms ache, joints cling, and flesh freezes to the handle in the cold. By 1944, some areas even had pump schedules, with wardens in charge of upkeep. Children carried tin pails home on shoulder poles. It was inefficient, but it saved lives. Today, most people have no idea where their water comes from, let alone where to locate it if the flow stops. Modern systems require power. Filters require pressure. What happens when those fail? The tool that requires no grid nevertheless delivers. It does not glow. It makes no beeps. It simply works. Because access, not technology, has always been necessary for survival. Would you know how to draw water if the system shuts down? Would you be left waiting for a truck that never arrives? They did not call themselves preppers. They did not post about resilience or boast about self-sufficiency. They just survived. Because nobody else was coming. These were not trained survivalists or those with expensive equipment. They cooked nettles for soup as their hands ached from cold. They rationed light in the same way we do time. And when systems failed, they did not protest. They started moving. Their survival was not based on raw power. It originated from tools. Simple, often homemade, and passed down as family secrets. A blanket is nailed over a window to trap heat. A water pump squeaks in the chilly air. A seed pushed into broken soil, because food for tomorrow begins with a decision today. These were not tactical or high-tech equipment. They were reliable when nothing else was. Every one of them was based on a deeper truth, complete self-reliance. They did not seek assistance. Instead, they provided it. Consider what systems you have in place that can function without electricity, fuel, or running water. Because the next darkness will not reveal itself. What about comfort? Comfort never taught anyone how to survive. Subscribe now, not for content, but so that when the stillness comes, you're not left wondering what to do.